How's it going, guys? Etzer here, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to create your own Geometry Dash icons to put in your own texture pack or to enter to the icon contest that me and Viper are hosting. If you aren't yet aware of this contest, you enter by drawing your own cubes, ships, UFOs, or other types of icons. You submit them to me and Viper, and the top 10 icons will be sent directly to RobTop. He'll take these 10 and put them directly into Update 2.2 for Geometry Dash. This means that your icons, your designs, your artwork will be put into the game Geometry Dash for millions and millions of players to customize, play as, and use. This prize is by far the best prize ever given out in a Geometry Dash contest, so I highly suggest you enter. Hand-drawn icons will be accepted, but more professionally fleshed out icons are the key to winning. This tutorial will help you make your icons look a cut above the rest by making them clean and professional looking. I'll be teaching you guys first how to make a basic cube while going over all the basics of the digital program Photoshop, and then cover some guidelines for creating UFOs, waves, and balls. Once you guys learn how to make a cube, I assure you that the rest is very, very easy and based off of the simple techniques I use making the cube. Without further ado, let's just get right into this tutorial. I'm using Adobe Photoshop CC 2016. It's not free, however you can download a free 30-day trial, which I highly recommend doing. You can download this with all the features all included. You can save, do everything you want for 30 free days. I highly suggest doing this because you're not going to need this program for more than 30 days, so please do this first. I don't want you guys spending money if you're not going to use it for more than a month. Of course, you do have 2 months for this, so if you want, feel free to buy it. Let's just get right into it and open a new document. We see new here, Control N. Let's click that, and we're going to make our document an even amount of size. So it doesn't matter pixels, inches, whatever you want, but what is important is that the width and the height is the same amount. So let's choose 1,000 and 1,000 for each one, just so it's the same amount. And when we click OK, we'll see that there is a square. And that's important because we're making a cube, and we want to be able to have things that are square-shaped, of course, because cubes are square-shaped. Starting off, all of this will appear very, very complicated to you, but I assure you, half of these tools you don't use at all. Starting off, the 3 things we'll be using are this toolbar over here, the Layer tool, and then the Properties tool, which we'll be going over in a little bit as well. We'll also be using a Transform tool, but I'll go over how to access that later. In this toolbar over here, the only 3 tools we're actually using are the Move tool, the Eraser tool, and the Ellipse/Rounded Rectangle tool. These are, of course, to move, erase, and create things that we need for our cube, wave, or whatever we're making. So starting off, if we want to make a cube, we of course want it to be cube-shaped. Most likely on your toolbar, you'll see a circle at first, which is just the Ellipse tool. You'll notice that if we hold and drag, you'll notice that we get a circle or an ellipse that appears on the screen, and when we drag and move it around, you'll notice that it changes size. So you'll notice this is kind of the tool to construct things. If I let go, you'll see that it makes a circle or it makes an ellipse. Let's delete that for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to hold down the ellipse, and you'll notice there is a drop-down menu with multiple options: rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, line, custom shape. The one we're going to be using for this tutorial is rounded rectangle. We'll be using ellipse a little bit, but rounded rectangle is by far the most used tool in this entire tutorial. Once we have that selected, we're going to click and drag and make our square. One of the tools I highly suggest you use is the Shift key. If you use the Shift key, it snaps the rounded rectangle tool to create a perfect square. So this means if you're dragging without the Shift key on, you'll get some weird rectangles like this, or maybe it won't be a perfect square. But once you click Shift, it makes it a perfect square and locks it into place. We're just going to drag this to a good size and let go. Now, you'll notice over here a Properties menu might have popped up for you. If it didn't pop up, there is a cube with 2 squares and a drop-down menu that symbolizes the tool icon for Properties. If you click this, you'll get something like this, so you can edit the properties of this rounded rectangle, or in this case, the rounded square. Again, this menu looks pretty complicated, but there's really 3 things we need to focus on. This drop-down menu right here with the 13 PT, the stroke and the fill tool, and then the roundedness of the square. Let's first go to the thickness. Right now it's 13. Let's first go to the thickness. Right now it's 13 points, but you can change this to different amounts. So you'll notice as I increase it, the thickness of the outside stroke of the rectangle gets bigger or smaller. So when I make this really tiny, you'll see just a sliver, and when I make this a little bigger, you'll see it almost fill up the entire square. For a Geometry Dash icon, you want to make it about a normal size that you'd see. So this, I'd say, probably around here looks pretty normal compared to most icons. Let's set this to 16 16 pt. That looks about correct. So now you'll see that we have a basic outline, although there's two issues with this. Number one is you might have something where the middle is filled with a color and maybe the outside is a color. That might be one of your issues. And the other issue is that yours might be very rounded in the case of something like this, where if you see it, you'll see it's very rounded, or yours might be barely rounded at all, where it's basically a square. These two things are fixed by the fill tools and the rounded tools. Let's first go over the fill tools. These two buttons signify the outside stroke color and the inside fill color. We usually have the inside fill color as a no fill, which is this white box with the red slash. This basically means that it's transparent, so you can draw through it, which is very important so that we make sure that all of our lines don't cover other lines. So that's very helpful. This is the stroke for the outside. So if you click on it and change the color, you'll see it goes to different colors. We're just going to keep it black because that's usually what it is in the actual game. Then this controls the roundedness, which essentially means the amount. And then these text boxes control the roundedness of the square. So if we make this a very high number, you'll notice it's very rounded. If we make this a low number, you'll notice it's a square. We want something kind of in the middle. Let's try 100. That looks pretty good. 100, this is probably good just because you get a little bit of roundedness in the actual cubes, but not too much that it overwhelms it and almost becomes a circle. Of course, your document resolution size is going to be different from mine, so don't use this as the end-all be-all numbers. Make sure to play around with it until it looks good. 16 points looks perfect for you guys. If it looks something like this, that's great. If you did a different size, it might have to be a different number. Either way, you'll still end up with a similar result at the end. So now that you hopefully have a good understanding of the properties tool as well as the rounded rectangle tool, let's get into making the inside of this icon. We're going to make a pretty simple icon today, but I encourage you guys to get creative with this and make your own that are inspired, but more very creative and not really just based off this one. We're going to go ahead and select the rounded rectangle again, and we're going to click and drag. Let's just create a little rectangle here. You'll notice the properties now has shifted to the properties of this one. So if I change the properties of this, you'll notice that only this one turns blue and not this one. If I go over to this layers menu over here, which I mentioned earlier, and I click this, it's now shifted back to the properties of this square back here. So now if I click this one, I can make this pink. So it's kind of the idea of just understanding the layers here, that selecting one of these layers selects the properties for this layer as well. Now that we have the one we want selected, I'm going to make this one a little bit rounder. Let's say 70 roundness here. That looks kind of good. And I'm going to do some properties to this to make this unique and have some more wiggliness rather than just a straight line, and some roundedness over here. For this, we're going to use the Transform and Warp tool. The Transform and Warp tool is basically the most used tool besides the rounded rectangle tool because it essentially makes all of the lines inside of the square. What we're going to do is we're going to want to free transform this. So we're going to hit Control T on our keyboard. If you're on a Mac, it's Command T, and if you want a hotkey for this, go to the top left, click the Edit button, Transform, Free Transform. Now that you have this selected, you'll see a couple opaque squares here and there. These are essentially the buttons that control how you enlarge, resize, rotate your rectangle, your cube, whatever you have selected. So if I click on this little rectangle right here, or this little square, you'll notice that I can enlarge the rectangle on the vertical axis. If I click this one over here, I can make it thinner or thicker. You should really just play around with this yourself. It's pretty simple once you understand. If you just play around with it a little and practice, it'll get very easy very quickly. The other thing to note is that you can rotate it. If you take your mouse outside of the rectangle, you'll notice that there's a rotate button that appears, and if you rotate, you'll notice that it simply rotates the rectangle around how I want it to. The biggest tool that we're going to use from this free transform menu, again, Control T pulls up the free transform menu. The biggest thing we're going to use is this warp tool up here. I know I keep saying this, but this button is what we use more than anything else in this entire tutorial, so please understand what we're doing here. We're going to click this button, and we'll see that a few lines come up, and when we hover around and click on this, you'll notice that it warps in this sort of weird kind of 3D way. You'll notice that it pops out, and when we drag it around, you'll notice that the edges of the rectangle now can warp around. This is really good for making lines and things that you want to make. So I can basically sculpt a whole thing out of just this thing. Let's maybe make a sneaker right now. Great, you got a little shoe. It's not great, but you kind of understand the idea and the importance of understanding how this button works, because it's by far the most used. Back to the rectangle, we're going to click Control T again to pull up the free transform, and then click the warp. Instead of doing the thing where we just click here, we're actually going to use a custom warp so that we can get it as precise and accurate as we want it to be. We're going to click Custom, and you'll see a large drop-down menu appear with arc, arc lower, arc upper, arch, bulge, shell lower, shell upper, flag, wave, fish, rise, etc. You get the idea. All these do different things, and I encourage you to try them out on your own because they're all very useful in their own ways. For right now, we're just going to choose the arc tool so we can get some nice curved lines that we're going to use, and we're going to hit enter. One of the things you'll notice is that there's another rectangle up here. Usually these rectangles are essentially what helps you control the parameters of what you're customizing. So if I click this rectangle, you'll notice it gets less of an arc or more of an arc, a very big arc, or very little, or you can make it upside down, and you can play around with this until you get something you want. Of course, there are other tools such as the bulge. This makes the outer sides bulge, of course. You could do flag, so you'll see it starts to get very wavy. You can see fish, we'll make it look kind of like a fish. Really just try all these out. You'll figure out what all of them do in very short time. I'm going to actually go with this one. I think this could end up having some good results. So we have a squeezed rectangle, and we are going to use this to create our icon. Right now, looking at this, I'm kind of getting some inspiration, and I'm seeing a little square root type of symbol right here. If I highlight that in red, I see this line right here, and I can see this being a kind of an object that I can rotate, so I can see something that goes around the edge of the cube, kind of like this, and I can see something looking cool like that. Let's try that out quick. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it up here, and we're going to position this little. So what we're going to do with this red highlighted, of course you won't have this red in, but I'm just going to show it so you can understand what I'm doing. We're going to click Control T, selecting the rounded rectangle, and we're going to rotate it, and let's just move it right here. So we have this red line. This is the red line that I want to use, of course. We're going to click Enter. We're going to move it a little bit more just so until we like it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to right click on this rounded rectangle layer, and you'll see this large layer pop up, and what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to rasterize layer. Essentially what this does is it makes it erasable. If before we had that selected, you'll notice that if we try to erase things, you'll see a do not enter sign kind of pop up that essentially says you can't erase this because it's a smart shape layer. If you enter this, you'll actually see an option that says, do you want to rasterize the shape? If you do, then click OK. Just a fair warning, if you rasterize too early, it can do some screw ups with the shape, so make sure you rasterize once you have the proper line and shape structure that you want. So of course, just be cautious with it. Of course, you can always use Control Z to undo and go back to the original shape and shape layer. So what we're going to do is we're just going to erase the parts that we don't want. Up here is our brush size. So we're going to pick a size that is somewhat large. This is probably good for what we want. And we're just going to erase everything that we don't need in this case. So I'm just going to be a little bit messy with this, but enough that it gets the job done. I'm going to delete this red part now just because you guys can see the line that I wanted to achieve. And what we're going to do now is we are going to just rotate this. We're going to duplicate this, and we're going to rotate it 4 times around so you kind of have this cool new design. So I'm going to right click it again, and instead of rasterize layer this time, I'm going to click duplicate layer. When I click enter, you'll notice I now have 2 of them. So now I can move this one separately from this one, and I can do all sorts of things like rotate it 90 degrees so I can duplicate it and shift it around the cube. So we're going to do just that right now. We're going to click Control T again for our free transform tool, and we're going to click the rotate, and we're going to rotate this until it's 90 degrees, and then click enter. I'm going to move this about till it's accurate. That looks about similar to the other one. Then I'm going to duplicate again, rotate 90 degrees, move it down about where I need it to be, click enter, duplicate again, rotate about 90 degrees to where I want it to be, and click enter. From here, I think I'm going to put a little icon in the middle, so I'm going to put a little circle and then fill this with white. So we get kind of like a puzzle piece looking icon, something kind of unique. And I think that's a pretty basic looking icon, but it's very simple, and you guys can definitely get some inspiration from this. It kind of looks like maybe the Hearthstone book, I don't really know, maybe a camera. There's a lot of different things, and you can really use this type of style where you take rounded rectangles and move it and add some objects, and of course you end up with a very good project. I'll show you a couple icons I've already made. This is one I made for my own texture pack. This is a dog, of course, and you'll notice almost all of the features I've already taught you guys are used here. Number one, if we delete all the other layers besides the one we care about, let's just start here. This is just a rounded rectangle that I taught you guys earlier. Then if we pull up the eyes, you'll notice that these are just circles that are rotated slightly with the free transform tool. Then this sheet is a little bit more complicated. However, it is simply just two ellipses merged together, so you guys can probably understand that with a little bit of practice. Then these, of course, are more ellipses that just create his little whisker type things. And then his eyebrows are more ellipses. It's a very simple design, but it gets the job done and it looks pretty good. Pulling up another here, we have kind of an interesting looking face that I made. Starting out, we have, if we just delete everything, we first have this rounded rectangle. Then we, of course, have a ellipse up here where I use the Rasterize tool to erase everything up here. Then we have another ellipse or circle, another circle, another circle. And then this was just an ellipse where I essentially just took an ellipse with a decent size, and then I basically did the Control T and then clicked the warp button up here, and then I warped it until it got to a mouth shape that I liked. And this does not look good as this, but it essentially is what I did, and you end up with a pretty decent looking face. Of course, you can get more complicated with it. If I take this one out, you'll notice that these are all very similar as well. So we've got this rounded rectangle with the bulge tool a little bit, and then we have these ellipses that are turned into eyes, then the black eyeballs, then the white in the middle with a little bit of erasing that I just did on my own time, and then add the mouth, and then add a little bit of sheen and smile, and there it is. Pretty much alone, that's a good enough icon. I would call that a very good icon myself. Taking a look at one more, you'll see this is a final version with the shading, with all of the glow, all of the color. But if I show the original, you'll see it's pretty simple to make. Starting off, we just have a rounded rectangle, and you'll notice a lot of it's erased, but this was originally a rectangle, which is the sides. Then we have these 4 rounded rectangles that are all moved into one combined shape. These are essentially rectangles that are slanted a little bit using the warp tool. Then we have this ellipse, which is essentially just 2 circles that are combined together and then rotated in this kind of funky way. And then a circle in the middle, and you'll notice that that is basically the end icon. So now that hopefully you guys have the basics of making a cube, I'm going to go into some other types of things that you guys can make. These are going to be just kind of brushing over. They're not going to be full-length tutorials like the cube was, but of course they're very helpful and necessary if you guys want to learn how to make these. Starting off, I'm just going to do a wave. We're going to click new and create a new project file. This time let's just do 1,000 again, 1,000, and let's call that good. And we are going to start by making another rounded rectangle. I know ellipses are triangles, but just wait it out for me and I'll show you why I do this in a second. We're going to make this about the correct size. So in this case, since I made a different document size, it's going to be, let's say, 40. That's a little small. Let's make it 60. 60 looks good. No fill is on. Black stroke. Let's make sure that's all true. And then roundedness. For this case, we're going to make it pretty round. Let's make it 300. So that's not a wave shape yet, but what we're going to do next is going to make it start to look more like a wave. We're going to use that free transform tool again, and this time when we select it up, instead of going up here to the warp menu, we're going to right-click the edge of the selection box, and we'll see a menu pop up with free transform, scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective, warp. All these options, as well as some rotating and flipping options, which are also helpful if you guys want them. The option that we're focused on right now, though, is the perspective option. Essentially what it does is it allows you to slant your cube in kind of weird ways, considering that you guys might be the perspective tool allows you to slant it in weird ways in case you were doing some kind of perspective Photoshop where you wanted to place a photo into a frame and make it look as if it's actually 3D and in real life. I'm going to use this tool for a bit different of a use. In this case, I'm going to use it to make this rectangle very pointy. If you take this outside right line and you just drag it in, you'll notice that it gets kind of a perspective as if it's a long hallway. But in this case, we want it to be more like a teardrop or a wave shape. So we're just going to make it until it's triangular and press enter. Now you have a pretty good base for a wave. Of course, you can do this with other shapes. So this was with a rounded rectangle, but one of the things you can do is you can do it with a rectangle that you first hit through the warp, click arc, click enter, and then maybe you do the perspective tool, and you end up with some very bizarre shapes. And of course, this doesn't look good, but you can play around with it until you end up with something that you enjoy. For the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to keep it simple and use the rounded rectangle still. And from there, I just encourage you guys to get creative with it. So I'm going to try to make this as similar to the waves in the games as possible. Maybe I'll click Control T, free transform, hit the warp tool, warp custom. Let's try arc lower. Then you'll notice only this side goes up and down. We can make it a little bit pointy on the bottom so it looks more like a real wave. And then maybe let's just add a second little one, just a tiny extra wave down here. And this part is inside of this one, so we're going to right click, rasterize layer, and then erase the parts that we don't want. And so right there, that's very simple. It's not contest winning, but hopefully it helps you guys understand the techniques to make a wave. Of course, there's other ones that I've made that I enjoy more. Here's a couple examples. Here is one with just a simple, very simple pentagon plus wave. You'll notice it just looks kind of pointy. It's a nice kind of fun wave, very simple. There's a little bit of shading, and really the entire thing is made out of a pentagon, a few pentagons, and then if I hide all these things, you'll notice that there is just a very simple, there's these two triangles that I kind of warped and played around with that are combined together, and then this triangle up here. Then when you combine them all together, you end up with something like this, and then when I overlay the pentagon over it, you end up with this. And it looks pretty simple. Another one that I have made in the past is this lizard one. You'll see this is how it looks in its final state. It's actually very surprisingly easy to make. I know it looks very complicated and out of reach, but if I pull up the project file right now, you'll notice that it's actually very similar to a lot of the techniques we've already gone over. So if I just delete everything and just show you just layer by layer, we've got a rounded rectangle with some bulge. We have the two sort of pincers. These are just rectangles that I used the arc tool on that I explained earlier. This ellipse used the bulge tool and some other tools to make it kind of head-shaped. Then we added the two eyes. And then we added the ellipses, which I used rasterize layer to just delete anything that I didn't want. I just erased parts that I did not need. And then you end up with a pretty good looking icon. And then afterwards, of course, I colored it in and things. But you'll notice that there really is not much different between these two. I added in a few shading just to make it look a little bit nicer. But this alone is a very good icon, so it's very easily in your grasp to create. I want to go over the UFO techniques with you now. Just a few examples of UFOs I made in the past. This one's kind of hexagon shaped. Then I've also made one that's more sort of round, kind of fun. This is one I made that's kind of just interesting. I don't really know if I like it or not, but it kind of accomplishes the points I want to make for this. You'll notice that if I delete all but one layer, you'll notice that it is in half. You'll notice that I only have this one half of the UFO. I find this super helpful to do. Create just one half of a UFO that you like, and if you kind of think like, hey, that looks good enough to put in a UFO, then I'll just simply duplicate this with the right click duplicate, Control T, width -100, and then I'll just move this over until it lines up, and you end up with a pretty good looking UFO. You'll notice I use this technique over here. I only just cut it in half. I only use this half, and then I just sliced it and duplicated it over here. This is by far the easiest way, just because you have to do pretty much half the work, and it allows you to spend more time on making sure that that single half that you're making is as good as you can make it. And then for balls, I don't really have I don't have that much advice for you guys. If you guys want to make it similar to the actual balls that are in the game, then feel free to do that. I have a template in the description where you guys can download this template right here. So you guys can just basically draw whatever you want inside of here, just so that you can make your own icons however you want. There's a link to the download in the description. Go check that out if you need it. In terms of making your own styled balls, what I suggest you doing is doing something like putting down a ellipse or a rectangle, hitting Control T, hitting the warp tool, warp, twist. Then if you twist this a lot, it might not work as much the first time, but if you continue to twist it over and over again, you'll notice that it starts to look more and more ball-like. So if I'm just going to keep twisting, you'll notice that I start to get some kind of whirlpool shapes. Then maybe I duplicate this, rasterize layer, and then delete everything in here. And this is a pretty bad looking ball. You can already tell this is pretty bad. But you guys, I hope that sort of demonstrates some ideas for how to do it. Maybe don't use a single ellipse and maybe twist it more carefully because that was just the max settings. I encourage you to just play around with it and make something that you guys find cool or that you guys would want to play with. Of course, this is your submission, so make sure it's something that you like and support. You'll see here this technique is pretty similar. I used the twist tool on a rectangle twice and then just added a circle in, and it looks pretty nice. It looks like pretty simple. This one was, I believe, a star that I used and then warped that, and then this one was some rectangles in the back. So they're very simple. All of these are very simple to do, so it's very easy to create these. In terms of spiders and robots and ships, I don't have any really suggestions for you guys. This is a spider I made, which is sort of hermit crab looking, and it took a very long time to make, and it's very complex to add all the glow in the right places and make it look like it belongs in the game. If you guys are beginners at this stuff and you're using this tutorial and following it step by step carefully, don't attempt a spider because these are very hard and your end product isn't going to look very good. If you guys make a really good cube, you're probably more likely than if you make a spider that just looks just okay. So I wouldn't advise doing a spider. Ships are kind of difficult. They're not symmetrical, so you want to make sure that they're pointing one way. This is one I drew that's kind of like a spaceship. Again, it's like a lot of complex objects, but if you look carefully, you'll see a lot of the things we've already learned. This circle was using the perspective technique in the wave. This is an ellipse that I deleted. This is a rectangle, and this is also a rectangle that I just warped. So this is pretty much fully made out of rectangles and circles that I've just sort of modified to my liking. And really that's all of my icons. That's how I create the majority of my icons. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. If you watched all the way through, please leave a like, show some support. I worked a lot to make sure this tutorial got out on time, and I spent a lot of time making sure that I simplified the tutorial as simple as possible so you guys can understand every part of it. If you guys have questions, please leave them down below because I know I probably missed something. If you guys are confused about something, I'll definitely be there to help you out. So just leave a comment below and I will definitely get to you and talk to you about these because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So if you guys have questions, I'm happy to respond to them. Thank you for watching, you guys. Please make sure to subscribe, like, whatever you want to do. This has been Etzer. I hope you guys enter the contest me and Viper have. There's a link in the description to all of that, of course. There's a link to the ball download, everything. If you guys just want general advice or want to see more examples, just leave a comment below or get in contact on my Discord server or somewhere. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you later. I said see you later like 5 times there, Jesus Christ. See you later, guys.